Hi there, this is Ashley Shook. Today I'm going to share with you my version 2 of my research proposal. My original one was the one that I did for ECED 7812 back in the spring of 2024. So today I'm going to share my research proposal on how early childhood educators understand and support children's peer cultures. But I'm going to highlight how my thinking and plans have evolved from my first year in the PhD program to the present, and how this has really transformed my proposal and my thoughts on how to complete this by 2026. So, children don't just copy adults. They create their own routines and their own rules and ways of interacting. And the problem is that adults often see these through an adult lens, and it colors their interactions and the way they interpret things. And so my study originally was to examine how educators perceive peer cultures and how their training and personal experiences influence their interpretations. So in year one, I may have said something like, kids just play differently than adults, so I'll study it. Now in year three, I can reframe this with some clarity. Something would be more like children have distinct peer cultures, and adults' misinterpretations often disrupt those peer cultures forming and the rules and how the children interact with one another. So, my study would focus on how educators see and respond to those cultures. And the research really investigate how early childhood educators understand and make sense of those peer cultures among young children, as their perspectives often fail to recognize or they disrupt that distinct social environments that children are creating on their own. Now, the research indicates that children's maintain their own peer cultures, which really necessitate an educational understanding to create developmentally suitable and strengths-based approaches that minimize adult prejudice and foster inclusive and learning environments for enhanced social and cognitive growth. What I've seen in my career is that a lot of teachers, they don't understand what's actually happening. And so my main goal of education, on my own to further myself has always been to really make information accessible to teachers that may not have been as fortunate to go to college. Now, peer culture is something I wasn't exposed to until my master's program. And so I know that this is something that's not widely known. And so this has really made me pivot from this original study to something that's going to be a little bit more accessible and practical for educators that are currently in the field and working. Now, the one thing that remains is the study's goal to explore how educators understand peer cultures. That still remains the same. So, the core problem is that adult viewpoints are frequently misread. Like they don't understand what's really the undercurrents happening between children that they're observing. And so, educator and education has really not kept up with this. It's not something that we really talk about, like in our bachelor's programs. I know here we didn't really talk about that. We talked about constructivist practices, but we didn't go into depth into Coursera's research until I got to the master's program. And so this really highlighted for me how teachers understand and really um, interpret what's happening. And this research really aims to bring those things to light and the dynamics so that the teacher can uh, prepare and have trainings that strengthens their actual response, and so that they're more responsive to the children and the children's needs. And so as a first year student, I would have just thought, okay, well, I need to do more research, because there is a gap on how teachers interpret children's interactions. But what there also isn't is what I'm planning on doing next. So it's going to give people something that they can really connect in professional practice. It'll support teachers in accurate observations. It'll reduce some of that adult bias and also promote a strengths based approach to looking at children's interactions. Now, these three questions were the original research questions, and it really was based in that lived experience of the teacher, and on whether constructive teaching supports authentic peer cultures. And all of these things are still kind of running in the background of my rewrite. for version 2, but I wanted to think more outside the box because these are things that you could infer from a lot of the research, but it's not like definitely defined as the research. Some of the observations I've done in my own career, you could see how the teachers they just didn't know what was really happening between children. They would say, "Oh my goodness, that's bullying or that's exclusion." But in reality, what's actually happening is these children are just really protecting their play spaces. And I feel like Coursera's information really gave us that base to understand. So for my version 2, I'm thinking of developing a peer culture observation tool or the PCOT. And it's a Corso aligned instrument for understanding children's peer cultures in preschool classrooms. And the reason why I really wanted to take this on is because I want to give something back to the learning community that is practical, that anyone can use. It's not just something that, you've got to have this designation to be able to do it accurately. I want this to be something that teachers can use every day in their classroom to really support the children in their care. So you could see the research questions that I had before. And so now my research questions in year one may have been a little bit vague, like, well, how do the teachers really view this? And now I'm really thinking specifically about how these things can be translated into observable indicators. What does it really look like? Because I can tell you all day long how children interact, what it should look like. But if you don't see it for yourself with the information to back it, then it's not going to be helpful and practical. You're not going to be able to connect theory to practice in a meaningful way. So I really want to see how educators interpret and use the PCOT during real time or video based observations. So they'll have some of those things going on maybe in this study. And then what revisions really help improve the clarity and the accuracy and the usability of this tool. That's really where I want to go now. I really want to examine how I could create something that teachers not only will be able to interpret what the children are doing accurately, but also that it's easy for them to use. It's not something that is difficult. It's something that they could pick up and go, okay, at a quick glance. Maybe this is something that's going on in my classroom because challenging behaviors are always there. But a lot of times, those challenging behaviors, or what we label as a challenging behavior, is really just something that happens with children when they're trying to figure out the world around them. So the purpose, like I said, is really to design, pilot, and refine an observational tool that supports early childhood educators in identifying, interpreting, and responding to children's peer cultures using Coursera's interpretive reproduction framework and constructivist theory. So I really want to make sure that these teachers are understanding accurate observations of what they're seeing in their classroom. And then we're going to talk about how to promote teaching practices that honor children's voices and reduce that bias from that adult lens that we often see children's interactions through. So, the theoretical framework, initially, I had listed a lot of theorists without really thinking about how to plug them in. So I've cut this down a little bit and I use this now to frame the study. So we know Piaget and Vygotsky, they explain early learning and how they work with their peers. We understand that through mediation and the zone of proximal development and scaffolding, with assimilation and disequilibrium, how that kind of when it throws a kink in there for them to try to figure it out. And then with Mead, we've got that genesis of self, where maybe those early threes that I'll be looking at are just now trying to figure out who they are on their own. And then Rogoff, she talks a lot about guided participation in the classroom. So it helps us think about this not only in a natural just play scenario, but also in the classroom. What does that look like? But overall, Coursera's interpretive reproduction, so those peer routines, the entry strategies into play, children's shared meanings of things, and how they adjust things. Maybe if a teacher makes a rule, they create what's called a secondary adjustment. So almost they can skirt the rule without breaking the rule. And then they have some how to cope with the things that are going on around them. It'll talk a little bit about friendship negotiation and peer norms. And so this tool really merges these two into observable indicators of how children are going to co-construct this culture with the teacher in the know. And so that teacher can actually support these children. And we think about how it is a development that occurs within a specific context, like that Bronfenbrenner piece. Rogoff is kind of inside of that, talking about how this change happens over time. And so these are really going to guide my methods and the construction of this tool and how to analyze it. So in year one, many of us are just learning the vocabulary for research. For example, I may have said I will use ethnography or ethnography without really exploring what it meant or why it fit my study, because it was a basic grasp of what these look like. But when you really start digging into it, you understand how long ethnography takes. You understand the why behind it. You understand what else you have to do to justify it. So in year three, we start to see research design differently. We've started really digging in and understand the implications of those choices. So instead of just naming something, now I can explain how it shows me children's peer cultures and context, while I also see the lived focus of experiences. And I can also think more about validity, like the aspects of triangulation or coding reliability and researcher bias. So that shift from describing methods really to justify and critically analyze them shows real growth in research design and understanding. And it's moving from just doing research as a student assignment to doing research that contributes to the field. So it begins to give us that actual practicality of the research. So this growth is evident in my own work. In year one, I would have stopped at saying I'll use observations and interviews, and that was true, but it's very surface level. So now in third year, you can see here I'm more specific. I describe the types of observations and the interviews and how I'll analyze them and how I'll ensure that findings are trustworthy. And so with this tool, how the coding will be peer reviewed for reliability, and the level of explanation demonstrates that I'm not only planning a study, but I'm also considering how to make it rigorous and meaningful. So with the methodology, you can see here, we're going to shift a little bit to talking about some qualitative design-based instrument development with some field testing. And so my participants are going to be early childhood educators, about 3 to 5 classrooms with children ages 3 to 5 in those classrooms. We're going to start looking for some expert reviewers, so some peer culture scholars, some people who really understand it, some graduate students that can help with the coding of these things as we get them back. All of those things, that's going to also work on my research team to really help me, because as we've learned over the semester, you can't do it by yourself. And it, just like Dr. Trivett said, it's kind of arrogant to think you can. So having these people that are expert reviewers are going to help really maybe bring some light to some things I haven't thought about, because again, we're always learning, we're always picking up new things. So as you can see here, year one, like I said, we limited it to, interviews and observations, but now we're really digging into what is this going to look like? How are we going to make it into these beautiful graphs, and how are we going to make it explainable to where it, doesn't just sit on a shelf somewhere, it's actually something usable, and how coding with all these multiple reviews minimizes the bias that we're going to see in it. We're going to think about that validity piece a lot, because I want this to be something that teachers are able to use and understand easily. So as you can see here with data collection, I'm planning on making a prototype and testing it. And then I'll go into some video-based coding sessions, get that expert review and focus groups up. Also some educator cognitive interviews to really hear what they're thinking, how they felt with the tool, and then get that inter-rater reliability testing so that we can make sure that this tool is something that is actually usable. So for data analysis, we're thinking of thematic coding, like those peer interactions, the educator interpretation, the tool usability. So making sure that, if there was something that was kind of off that teachers were like, I don't think I can do this, that we really think about that and think it through so that we can make sure that we understand what um, our codes need to look like so that they will be accessible to the teachers in a way that would flow naturally in the classroom. We're also going to think about that validity piece again, making sure that what we've said matches with our theory, matches with what's going on in the field, making sure that all of the things are necessary, and making sure that we've done all of our background work. When we think about our calculations, we're going to be thinking about Cohen's kappa and things like that. And then this is kind of the cycle that we're going to have. We're going to have the PCOT version 1, version 2, and then the final prototype. So really understanding that part of the rigor of putting this through the test to make sure that it's something that's usable. And of course, I'm sure there'll probably be version 3, 4, and 5 by the time we actually get to where it's something that can be used on a massive scale. So the key revisions from my original proposal look like a shift from broad ethnography to structured, purposeful tool development. And then there's a stronger theoretical alignment with Coursera. So really thinking more in terms of Coursera being that framework instead of many frameworks trying to come together, really holding close to what Coursera's research has shown us. And then clearly constructing some definitions, because as I was reading over a lot of my paper that I've already completed, um, I'm seeing that maybe I need to use a little bit more lay language. And that way it's educator centered and it feels approachable to them, even if they haven't had the opportunity and the fortune to be able to work on their degree or go further with their education. This will actually give them theory, but it's accessible. And so this multi-phase validity and reliability makes sure that we get something that's practical for the classroom application, because that's really the focus here, is making sure that we're using theory in something that teachers can use anywhere. This is kind of the timeline. It's been streamlined a little bit, and it's going to have an adjustment because before I already had IRB approval for this pilot. But in January, late January, I plan to do my comps and my prospectus. And then as you can see, from February on, we'll be piloting this PCOT. I'll probably be working hot and heavy on this over the break between semesters. And then thinking about how to get it out and rolling in February and get some educator feedback, get some data collection done. So, of course, that's going through IRB, but this time I'm not looking at really working with the children, I'm just working with the teachers. So, we're going to start thinking more along those lines of we're not having to work with getting parents to sign off on consent, we're not having to work on getting assent from the children. All we're doing is working with the educators to really get some insight to what they're doing. So that'll cut down on the time to get IRB um, secured. And then, as you can see, we're going to have to do that revision probably around April and May. And then we'll do a full scale launch between June and August and get some observations in there. And then in September and October, the data analysis will begin and we'll draft the results and the discussion chapters of my dissertation. And then hopefully complete my dissertation defense and submit for graduation for December of 2026. I know that this is going to be very fast paced. I know that it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of focus. And so I do hope that I am able to meet my goal. But if not, there's always another semester. So my goal right now is just to be completed by December 26th. But like I said, if there's a hiccup, we got another semester we can roll with it. And so I do understand, just like with every study, there's limitations, and it's no different with mine. With the 1 year timeline, I won't have the prolonged multi-year immersion that these studies often allow. And that's one thing that I'm thinking, well, I can take this and this can be something that I work on for a very long time in my own research. And so this project is highly feasible and aligned with my goals, but it also has some limitations that can turn the design choices rather than really thinking those through. I could do it really quickly and come up with some hiccups. And so I need to really think about how to do it in an appropriate way. And so it does have a very strong theoretical grounding with Coursera plus other constructivist theory, which gives us some rich and coherent constructs like routines, entry strategies, shared meaning, mediation and scaffolding, zone of proximal development usage, and guided participation, which is exactly what an instrument like this would need. And it increases the likelihood of strong construct and content validity. Um, and there is this clarity with the staging, the four phases, the making the concept, the prototype, the pilot, and then field implementation. And so that helps with the strengths to make sure that we're doing something that can be linked between theory and a real world evaluation. And so that structure makes this work defensible for my dissertation and realistic to manage. The focus to really think about the usability for the educator builds in those cognitive interviews, building in practical utility into the tool instead of just stopping at just given numbers of, oh, this would be the numbers for this tool. This is a really good strength for educator facing instrument that aligns with the design science expectations that really should work in practice and not just in theory. That's my goal always, is to make sure that I'm doing something that can work in practice in every classroom, and then targeting 3 to 5 classrooms for the initial pilot. It really fits common guidance that small numbers of sites are acceptable. And it's really advantageous for deep and qualitative work that's really going to help give some depth of understanding and refinement rather than population representative, which also leads into a limitation. So we could really think about how this, over a couple of years, it could make it really a large scale tool that could be used for all classrooms. And so that's really what I want to think about. And so we know that this is a small study. And so with that small study, it's going to need to be larger later on. And so that refinement really can be an uphill battle sometimes, but it is going to be well worth it once this is done. Um, and so we need to think about how going through and refining it stays true to the original context of thinking about peer culture phenomenon and what that looks like in the early childhood classroom. So, the significance of this is really to help teachers see strengths and not deficits. It's a practical tool that's grounded in strong theory, and it enhances educators' understanding of peer culture. And it really is going to improve professional development around social learning within children's classrooms. So as you can see here, these are the things that I've learned. I'm really just gone from doing research to really becoming a researcher. And so I think that that's big growth for 3 years. And so I want to make sure that children really are given the opportunity to have powerful and unique peer cultures that help shape them to become adults who can navigate the social aspect of their life. And so educators' interpretations either support or disrupt those cultures. And so my study really aims to help educators see, hear, and honor children's voices so that they can become the person who they're meant to be. So thank you so much. I'll look forward to your questions and your feedback on this study. And I hope that you all have an excellent day.